Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics to break down week 3 from the OUA season. A week that had a ton of weather, a ton of offense nonetheless, and 2 games that me and Tom were live and direct from, freezing our tuchuses off despite it being still the first week of September. We'll talk about all of that stuff and a bag of chips and much more. But first, Tom, may I just ask, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing so great, my man. You always catch me with the change-ups to some of those intros. I get a little nervous thinking that you're not going to ask me how I'm doing, but we're back here. I'm doing well. It was a great doubleheader of football with you on the weekend, as it always is, my friend.
Nothing on this end's ever scripted. And same right back to you, my friend. Such a pleasure. We got to check out 2 awesome games that we'll get into, as we do always, breaking through all 5 games that we had this weekend. But of course, off the jump, we're going to hand out a little hardware starting on the offensive side of the ball. Tom, where are we going for our offensive player of the week?
We are going down to Kingston, Ontario, the home of the Golden Gales. As we were talking about how important it was going to be for that offense to really get going, they did exactly that. Mr. Alex Vreeken finally getting into form here. 22 for 29, 302 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. He gets our offensive player of the week.
And we'll obviously talk about everything and more in that game, but worth noting, of course, that wasn't even in a full 4 quarters of action. He put that up against a defense with your boy Foxy Noxy that was, definitely bringing some noise, but we'll get there. Shout out to you, freaking shout out to the Queen's Golden Gales. I suppose I must take the lead for our defensive player of the game or of the week, I should say, because he plays on the defense of my Ottawa GGs. It's going to none other than Eric Cumberbatch. He had, I'm pulling up the stats right now. You'd think I would have done that a second ago, but he had it doesn't count. It's all right. Eric, you got hosed by the stats maker, and maybe this is how it works, but he stripped the ball a la Ed Reed, like from Anthony Miller's hands, pulled it out, spun out of the pile, takes it for the touchdown. He only gets credited with the fumble recovery on that one, which I think's a load of you-know-what, but he gets 4 solos on the day. He gets a sack. He gets a breakup. And, of course, on that fumble recovery, I'm giving you a forced fumble as well in my books, Mr. Cumberbatch. He ends up taking it 57 yards in a game, like we said, or as we will set up, I should say. A lot of defense, probably the tightest game in terms of score, the majority of that game, second to maybe with the Laurier Guelph game. So a huge moment in the second half. Tom, let me send it back to you and back to Kingston, though, for our special teams player of the week. Another no-doubter like it was last week, eh?
It has to be. It absolutely has to be. When you look at the production of one Ian St. Arnaud, it lists them as punt returns, and I'm getting a sense here as the stats, it's either kickoff returns and then everything else, because he does finish in the punt return category, 7 attempts, 276 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, both of those touchdowns were on missed field goals that were returned, and were returned for damn near 120 yards the entire length of the field. This young man was outstanding. And to go along with that as well, just as a general setup, shout out to our guy, Charlie Taggart, special teams coordinator for those Golden Gales. He did a hell of a job. That group was firing on all cylinders.
My man. And obviously, as you said, when they come off the back of missed field goals, that's a cumulative 20-point swing. We'll get into that game and so much more, but we'll start off with the game, the first of the 2 games that you and I saw, the game that gave us everything we could have expected and then some. It was the Guelph Griffins going on the road to fall short to the home Golden Hawks. Laurier picking up this win 33-24. A few just window dressing things off the top. That field looks and feels fantastic. An amazing crowd in the house, with the expectation that as they continue to finish up the the design that they've put together, which looks beautiful for the new stadium or the renovations to the stadium. It'll only be able to seat more, but the crowd that was there was into it. Those Guelph fans traveled phenomenally, making noise at the right times, as you highlighted, Tom, and a great atmosphere. Part and parcel with that. Shout out to all the wonderful, beautiful folks that took the time to say what's up to us. That was amazing. Really, all the love out to y'all. Thank you for tuning in. Please continue to do so, and all your feedback as we get is greatly appreciated. Oh, and oh yeah, there was an awesome football game that we saw from start to finish. Tom, take all of that into consideration, or anything else you want to talk about. What are your opening thoughts when we look at that Laurier Guelph game we saw?
This was one of the few games I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. This was another game where we hyped it up, saying this is going to be the marquee matchup. You have to come and see this. And it lived up to the hype in every sense of the word, from opening kickoff until the final whistle was blown. This was a fantastic atmosphere. It was also amazing because, once again, shout out to the wonderful people who recognize us, who came up to us and said hello. Somebody that I've gotten to know pretty well, in one of the recruiters, Aaron, for Laurier, he saw us at the beginning of the show right before everything was kicking off. The teams are still on; they're doing the warm-ups. Hey, you want to come out onto the field? And so Zach and I are out there, and we're taking in everything. We're watching both the teams warm up. This is awesome, saying hi to people. And then he leaves, and some of the other coaches who knew us leave, and you and I are just kind of standing there at the 55, going, nobody's going to kick us off here, right? Like, we're good. We don't have any credentials or anything, but it was an awesome atmosphere. It was an awesome time. And what a game. We should probably get into the game itself.
We should probably start talking about it. So many angles to approach from, but I'm going to go to the aspect that I think, aside from the game as a whole, that collectively I think we were most excited for, which was the return of Isaiah Smith, looking as large and in charge as he ever was. And, to Laurier's credit, and actually I'll partner that up with, we see the return of Isaiah Smith. We don't see Donovan Malloy, though. And we still see Caleb Sargent in this game, and he is looking fantastic, really validating the great things we saw from him in Toronto against UofT. But, so much of the prognostication on my part that went into thinking Guelph could have pulled up the upset. And I appreciate all the chirping that I received both at the game and via other mediums of people thinking that that was some outlandish pick. This is my check the scoreboard moment, I suppose. One of the big things that we were thinking about was, with some of the missing pieces on that Laurier defense, and how we saw Max start to get that running game going, that if this was the week that Guelph circled on their calendar, and if you look at how the game fared last year when these two teams played, no doubt they had this game circled. With Isaiah Smith in, how good Donovan Malloy looked last year and looked to start the year against Carleton, that their advantage would certainly be on the run, in the running game. And as we said, our guy Caleb Sargent still crosses the 100-yard mark, picking up 101 yards on 11 carries. Tristan Aboud makes some hay with his feet. This Laurier team holds Isaiah Smith to 18 yards on 9 carries. And Tom, you were getting some text from some folks that were watching, getting a different vantage point from us. And it makes all the sense in the world that maybe he looked a little, I don't want to say timid, but maybe just a step short from how he normally we would expect him to perform. What did you make of Guelph's rushing attack and Laurier being able to really effectively shut the door at times on that rushing attack?
So I think it's worth noting here that regardless of how good we think a player is, and everyone who's listened to us, especially myself, I think the world of Isaiah Smith. I think that he is a phenomenal player, and I think that he's showing flashes of it. But at the end of the day, this is a young man who hasn't played football in a year, hasn't gone up against a live opponent in over a year, considering he went out in week 1 as of last year. So there's going to be some rust there, and you certainly saw some hesitation. One of the first handoffs that he had, there's an opportunity for him to put his foot in the ground and get north-south and go up the field, and he decides to try to bounce it out. Now, he's got the speed in order to do something like that, but a fully confident Isaiah Smith, who's been in the system and been really doing his thing, I think has that capabilities to put his head down and go up the field with that. So certainly there are some There's some rust in there that needs to get knocked off, some more confidence that needs to be built. Now, we did also see him in a lot of sets where he's the slot receiver or the fullback type, and you've got Caleb Sargent in the backfield, and you and I are looking at each other going, oh, damn, this looks terrifying. But I do want to say my prediction, I did pick Laurier to win this one, which was right. I did also say that Guelph was going to rush for 200 yards. They fell short by 4 yards, 196, but I'd say that's pretty damn close.
Yeah, you mentioned them putting Smith into the slot, often on like the four receiver of like a quad set, motioning him in to block some for Caleb. And then we also got to see, though McCray went down with a bit of an injury at time, and I think we saw him come back in afterwards, so validating that, the young man is all right, though maybe a bit dinged up. I forget who the back was running with him, but just seeing some option looks where, again, we're starting to see, and again, the more times we're live at games and conversations about Guelph and specifically about what Coach Soria does from an offensive coordinating standpoint, we're really starting to see how he is taking advantage of all those weapons. And of course, with Malloy still out, they're still short a player. We've seen, especially in short yard situations, even going back to the Carleton game, them using some diamond or full house backfields. Can you imagine, Tom, when that full house backfield is like, let's say it is McCray in that quarterback, and he has Smith, Malloy, and Sargent in there with all the wideouts he has and everything like that? Man, oh man, again, why there's all the excitement around Guelph. Some people are saying, Zach's back on the bandwagon. And again, I certainly am. And we won't, whatever, all the reasons that's included. But again, when you look at what this team's doing, the pieces that are in place and the folks that are putting those pieces in positions to succeed, it is a fair, and it's the right take to have that this Guelph team is in the right position. And obviously they showed going into Laurier that they can do battle with them. But, yeah. but, and sorry, it wasn't quite there. Laurier kind of gave him the big brother stiff arm the whole game through. We'll get into that, Tom. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I almost cut you off, and I'm so sorry, my friend. But the thing that I wanted to make sure, because people who are tuning into this, especially the Laurier folks, are going to be like, well, why are these guys spending so much time on Guelph? Like, they lost this game, whatever. Let's not forget, we came into this season, we were talking about this Guelph Griffin team and how excited we were about the new coaching staff that was in. Obviously, having the return of Coach Mike McDonald and Coach Cluffer, Brian Clough, those two guys on the O&D line are outstanding at what they do, and they immediately make those position groups better. But to see Coach Soria really take over this offense and be there and be the main guy calling the plays, because we heard from a few people that he wasn't, even though he had the offensive coordinator tag. And then to see Coach Matt Barry come in and do this. Last year, Laurier beat Guelph 60-21. This is the exact same team. They are the same players. It's obviously a new coaching staff, but this is the exact same makeup of this team. This coaching staff came in with a phenomenal game plan, putting their guys in for success and utilizing them in the right ways. And now suddenly we come down to the wire on special teams points. That is the deciding factor here. So that's why we're so excited about this Guelph Griffin team. They are finally playing to the level of the talent that they have on that squad. And a big, huge part of it is because of the coaching staff and what they're doing there. So I really just wanted to take up that second to really shout that out. And plus, I wanted to highlight again, you and I saw the Marshall McCray option was in the end zone that we were in while he was doing that. You and I both looked at each other when that happened, went, oh my God, this is terrifying. Who do you block? Who do you go after? Either guy can torch you. It was just outstanding. What an atmosphere. What a game.
It certainly was. And as I alluded to, though, Laurier obviously proving to be that much too tough for these Guelph Griffins. And, this was such a gutty performance by both these clubs. You mentioned the special teams being the difference there. I mean, you also have, again, for the Laurier folks tuning in, they're probably sitting there being like, okay, sure, you can chalk it up to the amazing backbreaking Tayshawn Jackson kick return touchdown, which, sorry, we didn't even get a chance to say this. Like, we talked about what Ian St. Arnaud did. His 2 kick return or missed field goal touchdowns were 2 of 4 bracket kind of 5 special teams touchdowns, because we have, as well as just setting up, Tayshawn Jackson, who after Guelph drives the field, scores a touchdown, kicks it off with less than a minute to go. This, again, first-year player who, with them losing Quentin Scott, was kind of that element. And we're going to talk about Tanner Nelms because especially late in that game,
Yeah.
it seems like Galley's game plan is like, all right, son, take us home. And with him and Dawson Hodge, a guy that we've been not critical of, but have noticed some of his performance had dip a little bit last year from when he was sort of at his peak performance. Those two guys, holy cow. But Ian St. Arnaud, as we said, with the two, Tayshaun Jackson, Roman Campanera with one, and then the other game we were at live, we see Everett Reed with a punt return touchdown that gets called back. So something was in the air other than that cold rain that was pouring down on us, and it led to some great special teams touchdowns. I digress. That certainly played into effect, and I'm so proud of how Guelph bounced back in the second half after that had happened, because those are the types of things, soul snatching, momentum breaking, whatever you want to call it. But Tom, we saw this Guelph team come off the UofT team game and saying they got to rein it in with the penalties, and they did a better job. 11 penalties on the day, keeping it under 100 yards given up, 93 yards in total. For Laurier, 15 penalties, so only 4 more, but accounting for 167 yards. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2 touchdowns that came back with those penalties. Again, and this is a Laurier team that, as we've talked about, and especially with Elgersma as the leader, they're going to play physical, bordering on, they're going to take it as far as they can, being a little chippy, and they're going to let you know, they're going to talk some smack. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's kind of, as we said about Elgersma's aggressiveness, you just don't get Elgersma without that. You don't get Laurier football without them just doing those things. But again, I think while the Guelph contingent, myself included, can be really happy with this performance, I think you can take the utmost positive perspective as a Laurier fan and say, well, okay, if y'all come back here in a month and change time, we'll be a little more buttoned up. Maybe we won't, whatever. We'll keep it a little calmer in times. And, we talk about how that same returning defense against pretty much the same returning offense, and it goes from 60 points to 33 for Laurier. I'm sure the Laurier folks are thinking, well, you add those 2 touchdowns, we're not far from that mark as is. Tom, what do you make of it from that standpoint? The penalties obviously are part of the game of football, but it's, again, Laurier can play a little chippy at times. What did you make of that standpoint?
I mean, it goes back into the DNA and something that you already highlighted, that being aggressive and being competitive is baked into the greatness that is Laurier football. That is who they are at their core. I said this a couple of times yesterday, but I just want to say it again. It's also the first time that I've ever seen an unnecessary roughness call against a quarterback because Taylor Elgersma is blocking somebody after the whistle down the field. It was the right call. It's just hilarious and so on brand for our guy. Not the fact that he's getting a penalty, but the fact that he's just out there. He hands the ball off on a power G and immediately goes up the field looking for somebody to block like he's an offensive lineman. Like, the guy is just, he's got all the heart in the world, and it's why we're so high on him. But like you mentioned, I wanted to shout out a few of these Laurier offensive guys. Tanner Nelms, 19 attempts, 104 yards, and 1 touchdown, just grinding them out. And when you see that 104 yards, he only had a long of 14. So he's constantly battering against a very solid Guelph Griffin defense and coming through on some very key plays, especially one I got a chance to talk to Coach Todd Galloway.
Yeah.
It's the 4th quarter. There's 2.5 minutes left. Laurier is driving. They're trying to drain the clock as best as they possibly can. And then it's a first down, 2-yard gain. It's 2nd and 8. You're in a very clear passing scenario. So what does Coach Galloway do? He goes quads to the field, leaves Laomi Ochitalayo as the only guy on the boundary, and then you run power G and you pick up the first down. And you and I are looking at each other like, the stones that you have to have in order to do something like that. Hell yeah, Coach, that's power football.
Doing what we wanted Windsor to do at Carleton last week when you had the chance to just complete the drive that you were pounding the rock and just finish it with that. That was beautiful. And of course, when it's Lay as the single receiver out there, I mean, that's a bad you-know-what out there. So that's all right if that's the one receiver out there. I didn't mean to interrupt that. But yeah, that was a huge thing for sure for you to highlight, Tom.
Oh, gosh, yeah, it was outstanding to see and really helping to put the edge over in that win. The other person that I really want to shout out here, obviously, our guy Elgersma throwing the ball all over the place. Ethan Jordan, 10 catches and with 105 yards with along a 36. Their game plan going into this was a lot of wide receiver screens, get the ball out in space to Jordan, make him make guys miss, because when he has the ball in his hands, he's one of the most dangerous out there. But then you go down the list and you go Jace Atkinson, 1 catch for 37 yards. Jackson Stebbings, 1 catch for 29 yards. Ryan Spate with an outstanding sideline grab that you and I were right in front of. We got a chance to celebrate pretty hard. 1 catch for 28 yards. It was an awesome showcase because in a great game like this, everybody had the opportunity to really showcase their stuff. Regardless, obviously there's a lot of catches that are happening here. Tanner Nelms being one of them, Raiden Thorne being in there, but you saw so many people on this team coming together and getting things done. Now, the other thing that I wanted to shout out here as well, you mentioned it while we're just talking about Laurier, but it's Dawson Hodge.
Yeah.
Because he only has the 1 field goal on the day, but it's the nail in the coffin to put that score within 2. You have to get 2 scores because they're up by 9. The maximum that you can get is 8 if you go for the 2-point conversion. So it's 2 scores with, I don't know, less than a minute to go or so, something along those lines. And not only that, it's a 38-yard field goal into the wind. So you have to crush this thing in order to get through. And it looked like he still had some more distance on it. He could move back. That's the Dawson Hodge that you and I remember. That's the Dawson Hodge from 2022. That was the All-Canadian. That's the guy that we have come to expect going into this. And he played outstanding. That was an awesome nail in the coffin move, like I mentioned.
And you're totally right. And it also, though, his day includes the outstanding job punting. It lists 2 inside the 20, which you and I felt was shortchanging him a little bit, but I think we kind of recognize that, you know what, it may have been on some of his kickoffs, or with, of course, in both instances, you know, the help of the 11 other guys on the field to pin Guelph deep. But the number of times, and frankly, again, this is what makes great games, because we can go off of this point of highlighting an amazing thing for Laurier and saying, but it also highlights a great thing for Guelph, which is on with the foot of Dawson Hodge and those 11 other Golden Hawks pinning Guelph deep. Guelph was still able to put together drives starting. It shows 2 inside the 20. There had to be at least maybe another, like a couple of those were inside the 10 to be sure. But absolutely, because that's the thing where when we talk about look at the Yates Cup from last year. The MVP was bloody Brian Garrity, and I love Brian Garrity. He's one of the best kickers in the league. But when you look at it like that, for Dawson to have a bit of an off year, and for him to be able to show that, like, again, he's back on his business like this, those are the things where, again, you know that in the tough games, especially and getting this sort of late October weather in early September to get tested, we were kind of talking about for kickers and quarterbacks, like, how do you really prep for like the wind when you know got to take off or out a little bit more at certain times? Do they have like a giant fan they bring out? Do they just check the weather app and say, oh, we got to go out and get some reps in right now? For him to show that type of control, poise, and everything of that nature this early in the season with the weather, and that, again, you can say what you want about those touchdowns that came back for Laurier, that Dawson Hodge, like to me, like if you were gonna do like a 3-person game ball situation, I'm giving 1/3 of that ball, that now deflated ball I've cut into thirds, to Tayshawn Jackson. I'm giving 1/3 of it Dawson Hodge, and I'm giving the other third of it to our guy in Tanner Nelms for really closing the door on those Guelph Griffins. Now, of course, defensively for Laurier as well, like, you know, our Malik Kote was all over the place. Jahari Hastings, the speed he has, where Guelph's getting the ball to some of their guys in space, and just there comes 25, like in the blink of an eye, was something special to see all game long, just trying to limit Guelph. And again, to Guelph's credit, still coming back on subsequent plays, subsequent drives, and just keep pushing forward. Tom, like we said, we saw Marshall McRae go out a little bit. Seems like he's back. Let's talk about this quarterback system that we've been seeing from Guelph, and we should talk about Taylor a little bit more than him picking up penalties or penalty. and almost catching another one where you could see he was like yelling straight at the Guelph sideline, and we're just in the end zone just going nuts. It was awesome. It was a great game. My goodness. I hope to be back there for the exact same matchup in 6 weeks, whatever it is. But we see Aboud go 19 for 29, 201, one touchdown, no interceptions. Again, he picks up 63 on the ground, picks up a touchdown in the process as well. Really solid game from him. McCray, only 3 attempts passing in the air, and then 3 carries. Again, one of those being a touchdown and him getting a little nicked up. Taylor, 18 for 23, 241, one touchdown, one interception in the hands of our boy, Anthony Mortuzo. Obviously, the weather was a factor for all these teams playing across the province yesterday. How did you feel that factored in with the quarterback performance we saw? Do you think that they changed the game plans for these teams? Do you think it affected them in some ways or the other? Or because obviously we know that for all these guys, they can perform better than this. How did you make their performance on the day given all those circumstances?
You and I were talking about this outside of the pod here a little bit, but it really didn't seem like they were getting that affected by the weather that was out there. I mean, you look at Tristan Aboud, 19 for 29, 201 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions. Taylor Elgersma, 18 for 23, 241 yards, one touchdown, one pick. And that pick, I would attribute more to our guy in Tuzo than anything else because he played outstanding. He really did. We were talking about the idea of him being more involved because previously in the other 2 games with Carleton and with Toronto, we'd only really seen him in their passing package that they had. And I think in the second half, they went back to that a little bit, whereas you and I saw on first down, if they make a tackle or if it's a very clear passing down, five new Griffins coming out onto the field to swap out for this passing situation, Anthony Mortuzo being one of them. And by the way, I hope from now on going forward that anytime he makes a big play, we just hear Tuzo. But he played outstanding. I really love to see that guy in as much as humanly possible because he just has a nose for the football. He always seems to come down with a key turnover, an interception, and he just tackles like a machine. It was fantastic. But to go back to the offense, you mentioned it earlier, and I really want to make sure that I highlighted it because I spoke to our guy and Coach Mike McDonald when we saw him after the game. But coming out of this for Guelph, you have to have so much confidence in your capabilities here because exactly like you said, Dawson Hodge had an unbelievable day kicking the ball, punting it within the 20-yard line, certainly within the 10 a couple of times, the kickoffs and everything. And then Guelph, at least 2 times, I think 3 times, taking it from their own 20 or close to, and driving the length of the field against a very good Laurier defense and coming up with touchdowns. Like that itself is so impressive and can be so difficult to do even against, an average defense, let alone one of the top in the OUA here. So that was outstanding to see. There are a few things that I think they need to work on. You and I were noting there was a few passes that Tristan Aboud was throwing that were behind his receivers a little bit. I don't know if he was expecting them to sit down in the routes a little bit more, or if he just had felt he didn't get his footing right or whatever the case, but certainly that hurts. And a couple of key drops in certain areas. But really, for the most part, this was an outstanding Griffin offense. Caleb Sargent, despite being like what looked like amongst that monstrous Griffin O-line, like he was 5'6", it just seemed like Laurier couldn't find him at certain times. And that even when they did find him, he was breaking tackles. He was making guys miss. I mean, you finished with 101 yards on a very good Laurier defense. Like this was an awesome game to see and to really put Guelph on the no, you know what? We are the team to be looking at. You have to be worried about us when you play us, regardless if it's at our house or yours. We're here. We're here to stay. And so while this is a very impressive Laurier win to really all 3 phases with offense, defense, and special teams here, I'm very proud of these Guelph Griffins with how they performed in a very tough environment. And like you said, cannot wait. And I'm praying to the football gods that we see this matchup in a playoff game, ideally as a Yates Cup, maybe. Although the Western Ponies might have something to say about that.
Those boys with the blue collar and gold swagger might have something to say about that too. A few last points I want to touch on, and we can discuss them and move off of as we please. Return of Javon Jacobson as well on the defensive end. And you know what? We saw him only in stints last year. So though it was impressive, didn't really get too good a sense of how he plays out there. And I think if you put it in a word, it's physical. He's tough out there. Kind of reminds me of with this other kid, Gianni Green, who is at least new to my radar. If he was on the team in years before on that defensive side, where again, when he's going to hit you and he's going to make sure you didn't catch the number on that car that as it goes by. To the back and forth nature of this game, how competitive it was, and just what a beautiful game it was to be watching. Just as you can go through the scoring summary alone, Laurier opens up with the safety conceded by Guelph, which super backbreaking when oftentimes teams concede that to get better field position. On the very next drive, Laurier goes down the field for a Jackson Stebbing touchdown from Elgersma. They go up 9-0, but then Guelph gets a touchdown. Then Laurier gets a touchdown. Then Guelph gets a touchdown. Then Laurier gets a touchdown. Then Guelph gets a touchdown. Then Laurier gets a touchdown. And then both teams get a field goal apiece. Again, it's Laurier being the big brother with the hand on the forehead being like, all right, you can swipe. You can take, maybe you nicked me a little bit there. But hey, you're still in our house. We're still, that team right now. Tom, last thing. You asked me a beautiful question before the game started. And I still don't know if I have an answer for it, but I want to bring it up because for folks listening, if you want to give us your take on this, whether through like commenting or DMs, whatever, Tom, let me give you the honor of being able to ask this question. This is your beautiful thought and your beautiful voice. Let the folks hear what you're thinking about with these clubs.
I appreciate you, my man. When you think about rivalries within the OUA, obviously things like Western and Queens comes into play, Mac and Guelph certainly. I think that while certainly there's historical rivalries, like I just said, the rivalry that's happening right now, where the two teams actually legitimately do not like each other and want to really give their all in a very physical game, is Guelph Laurier. Both of these staffs, both of these players on either side just don't like each other. Just straight up don't like each other. We were speaking with a few folks on the Guelph side, and some of the staff are like, yeah, those knuckleheads over there, and they're already kind of jawing back and forth. And obviously we spoke to Taylor previously, and he's mentioned some of his feelings, and certainly the way that some of those players were playing and the jawing that we saw, that's a confirmed thing. So my question was, is this the most recent new rivalry? And not even new because Laurier and Guelph have always played whatever, but it just in this bad blood era here, it seems like these two teams are the newest really heated rivalry because obviously Western and Queens, while they still don't like each other, it's kind of lopsided right now. And you could make the same argument for Guelph Laurier, certainly, at least in the past couple of years, but it just seems like they're getting close. This is competitive and this is angry football.
Yeah. And, I think it's a great question. I think I asked for more time to answer. I'm still going to ask for more time because both these clubs are going into some pretty big rivalry games next week with Laurier hosting Western and Guelph hosting Mac. And especially with how that Mac team looks defensively, not just in how they play, but kind of similar as we described the whole Laurier team, just that FU attitude they take seemingly at all moments, whether they're playing or off the field and everything like that. I'm very excited for that Mac Guelph game next week. Tom, I think we're going to be there, right? Are we checking that one out? Is on the schedule? I might be getting brunch. I don't what.
It's of course our first ever At the 55 game day live happening for the At the 55 Bowl next week in the Royal City for Guelph against McMaster. You can catch us. We should be live and ready to go at 11 a.m. Check our YouTube page at the 55 podcast. You will see us. We'll be live right there. We're working on some things in order to be either tied to OUA TV or in another avenue. But right now, this is the best option for us. And it seems to be where a lot of our viewers come to watch us, obviously, is our own YouTube page. So please tune in there. We will be live and direct at 11 a.m. Saturday, September 14th. Please tune in.
The only thing that I don't love about the production we're going to be doing is that since it's at 1 o'clock, it's the same time as Laurier hosting Western. So we can't catch that one live, but it's going to be a beautiful thing. And we have conversations going with some other clubs about some possible similar opportunities coming down the pike. So that, of course, is where these two teams in Guelph and Laurier are heading to in the following week. Speaking of simultaneous 1 o'clock games, let's talk about the other 1 o'clock game from week 3.
The transition king.
Also in Waterloo hosting and falling to my Ottawa GGs from Warrior Field. Final score in this one, Ottawa 26, Waterloo 5. Tom, I think we talked about in the preview pod, what are the things for both these clubs, despite Ottawa coming from a win, Waterloo coming from a loss, both, and it's early in the season, so teams are still finding themselves, but both these teams really showing some things that I don't think they were terribly happy with in their previous games. Obviously, for Waterloo, when a team drops 70 on you, that's tough. For Ottawa, Ben Marichel's first game, really trying to find his footing after, much like in the same way we talk about Isaiah Smith being out for over a year, given that it was a week 1 injury from 2023, still finding his footing. Now, the irony with these two games, the one we just talked about in this one, and it perhaps is not ironic because I think that we know the talent, the teams in the one we just talked about are better right now, obviously, than the ones we're about to talk about. And because it felt like whether it was a function of the weather being a factor or these two defenses, one in Ottawa we've talked a lot about and one in Waterloo with K-Mac, Coach McNeil, with his now 3rd game with Waterloo under his belt, both really held each other to a tight game. It's a 26-5 score. That's a late touchdown by King Charles Asselin to make it that 27-point score. And of course, as we mentioned, that Eric Cumberbatch forced fumble, strip fumble, whatever, takes it to the crib. So you have a late touchdown, you have a defensive touchdown. Ultimately, again, a tight battle. The weather was the same. We were just down the street. Was that more of a factor in this one for these clubs, or did you see this more as, you know what, these defenses really got busy today?
Yeah, well, sure, you could probably make the argument of the weather came into a big factor here. I want to shout out the guys in the trenches themselves. I want to shout out the defenses for both of these squads because they really played fantastic. Waterloo, Michael Omoseni, 7.5 tackles, a pass breakup. Ansu Latmore, 6 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 block. Like, there was awesome defensive showcases across the board here that I really think contributed to everything happening in terms of the lack of offensive production, you could say. Even our guy in King Charles, Mr. Aslan, he gets a touchdown on the day, the lone touchdown offensively for the GGs, but that doesn't come until the 4th quarter after really trying to batter down this stout Waterloo Warrior defense here. So I think that showcases that Waterloo really came to play in this one, and that once again, we did not see the production from Mr. Ben Marichel that we are expecting from. I mean, he finishes the day 10 for 18, 159 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. And even at halftime, his total stats are 106 yards passing. But Charles Aslan is a big part of that. So if you take away Charles Aslan and you just focus on everybody else, all of his other receivers that he has, he finishes the half with 47 passing yards to somebody not named Aslan. So we've already talked about the key to this Ottawa GG team is getting Charles Aslan going as best as you can. And obviously they did that. 29 attempts, 184 yards, a long of 28 with 1 touchdown, and then in receiving 3 catches for 78 yards with a long of 47. So they're utilizing him to the best of their abilities, certainly. I'm expecting more from Marichel, and this is the 2nd week now that we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, to all the folks in the Ottawa region who aren't Carleton Ravens fans, protect Charles Aslan at all costs. Get CSIS on it if you have to. Like, this man must stay healthy, right? Not only for the success of this team, but because he's so dynamic. As of recording, well, as of the end of week 3, he's the U Sports rushing leader right now. And, you know, you can contextualize that a little bit to say that, well, you know what, with, if Keon Edwards is just getting the ball all the time for Western, this, that, and the third, if Kasari is a little healthier and whatever, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's still this guy, right? And also the fact when you think about going from Simonkinda to Polk to Aslan, like, I feel like being so far away from Ottawa, though I clearly have had this fandom, whatever, has pushed it forward. I mean, just them playing great football is reason enough to be a fan. We really need to start diving deep into what makes, with Coach Belfay at the helm and the club he's running, just so consistent year in, year out. But, the Ben Miracle thing. And when we were in Laurier, when we're leaving Laurier, we're talking to folks. And again, it wasn't just a surprise to our eyes to see the lackluster game he had in against York week 1. But then, as we're talking about with some people after the Laurier Guelph game of like, what's going on at Waterloo? And we're reading off the score and we're trying to figure it out because obviously we weren't watching it at the time, of people on these clubs being like, obviously he's coming back from the injury, but recognizing that, again, this is a guy who's been in that program now for like 5-6 years. When this team's functioning at their best, he's right there with it. But we talk about what Aslan does in the run game and just the key to this whole offense. There's a lot of things I enjoyed from this game. As always, number one, just getting to listen to Adam McGuire call a game and paint the picture of everything going on there. But with seeing Waterloo, and you're obviously facing a much different opponent in Ottawa than in Western, get back to the rushing game. And not just with Anthony Miller finally having his breakout day for the year, 15 carries for 103. He's topped for top rusher by Mr. Nick Orr. As I heard them say on the broadcast, they call him Bobby because he wears number 4 and has Orr on the back. Let you figure that one out. Which again, as I thought, what made them so dynamic and so exciting in that opening game against UofT, where he was making good reads. He's getting it into his playmakers' hands, but then taking off at the right time as a product of, whether it's first read, second read, reading the pressure, being able to step up in the pocket and use the athleticism that he has that, again, it's in a losing fashion. And this team now sitting at 0-3, and that's a tough pill to swallow. But, again, being a younger team, and like this game kind of still falls in that 50-50 category, a couple bounces here and there. I was really, again, just happy when this is a team where last year, if you said, what's the thing that Waterloo did the best in 2023? They ran the ball. They got back to that as the thing that makes them a special team, with Nick Orr adding it in as well.
Yeah, finally seeing that run game get to where we expected to is something obviously that we're happy about. But the other thing, once again, to really focus on, not to focus on, but has surprised me, Quentin Springer.
Yes.
5 attempts for -2 yards.
We don't like that.
Somehow still has a long of 15, though. So obviously lots of things happened in the game. I think he got tackled a few times in the backfield, whatever, but still a little bit surprising to see one running back get going and not the other one, and to finish with negative yards, not just to that, he only finished with like 30 or something. Anyways, getting back to that run game, I was very happy to see that. Even the play of Nick Orr in general, for the most part, I liked what I saw. His final stat line, 17 for 39, 155 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. So they're utilizing him obviously a lot. Asking any quarterback to throw it 39 times is certainly on the higher side of things than not. But I think he is quickly becoming the real focal point of that offense. Previously, it was the two-headed monster that was Quentin Springer and Anthony Miller. And certainly I think they can get back to that, and they will later on in the season. But for right now, Nick Orr really seems to be the guy who holds the keys, who's really helping to get the offense going. There was a few, it's frustrating because there's a few times where he's that close, just so close to having these big plays. I remember one, there was a corner route in one of the end zones to Evan Basiliga, and he dives just through his outstretched hands. If he brings that one in, it's a touchdown in the first half to really put them up over the GGs and maybe change the momentum of this game. But even an Ottawa team that we certainly thought had a lot of higher capabilities and certainly a very strong defense no matter what, but this game is 6-3 at halftime. And if not for a Cole Crossett missed field goal, it's a tie game going into this. Now, obviously, the second half, Mr. Eric Cumberbatch comes up with the strip sack, or sorry, the forced fumble recovery, and the touchdown, and then Mr. King Charles gets into the end zone. So that's really what puts them over the edge here. But Waterloo was certainly in this, at least in the first half and going into the third quarter as well. So this was a much improved Waterloo squad than what we saw last week at bare minimum.
And you mentioned that would be touchdown to Evan Basiliga in the corner. And, again, like it may have hit his hands, but I'm not going to give him, crap for that. It's a hard catch to make. It's in the perfect spot by the way, the defender's right on him and everything like that. You're just looking for like that perfect play. But I want to also just bring that or acknowledge you bringing that up to also say that would have brought the house down because, another theme from this week, we were obviously at 2 games and watching the other 3 seemed to get a sense that there was a continuity with this in the other clubs. Great crowds at these games. Like whether it was full houses or close to full houses. And again, we obviously mentioned how great it was being at Laurier, both in terms of how filled up it was and kind of being like, oh, yeah, we got a lot of people tuning in from the Laurier era. Like that's a Waterloo thing. Because if we were at that Waterloo game, again, I have all the love and respect for the world with how Waterloo gets down with their football. Both, I mean, the Junior Warriors program is a really strong program, but as well with both these 2 universities, they do an excellent job. The community that is of really supporting these clubs. So that the house would have come down for sure. Now you mentioned Cole crossed out with a missed field goal on that. He goes 1 for 3, and it's a tough day to be kicking in, right? So I'm not gonna beat him up for that by any means. But what I want to actually do is to highlight, frankly, on the other hand, Zachary Copeland kicking for Ottawa, where in the punting game it's still only averaging 38.5, but not far off of where Cole was at 41.2. Again, the win being what it was, but I don't know if we talked about this after week 2, but Copeland struggled. I don't want to say mightily. That's perhaps a bit too strong. And I think it was more in the punting than in his place kicking and field goal kicking. But he struggled at York on a picturesque weather day from Lions Stadium at the University of York. In this game, he goes 4 for 4 on his field goals with the 2 extra points. So he accounts for 14 points on his own. Again, in a game where late touchdown for King Charles and then the touchdown for Cumberbatch. Kind of that same point talking about Dawson Hodge, especially this is Canadian football, right? And we got an early sneak preview. It was insert Ned Stark, winter is coming, preview of, again, what we're going to get from the late throws of the season into the playoffs. And again, just a shout out to Copeland for, he's replacing, one of the greats there in Campbell Fair. And, we obviously don't necessarily talk too much about the kicking game. We wouldn't even know where to begin to analyze it. But, no doubt those are, pardon the pun, big shoes to fill. Really stepped up in this one from where he was when we saw them against York. Tom, either on that or anything else, what else were you seeing watching these 2 clubs? Again, this is a tight ball game with these 2 clubs. Don't be mistaken by that final score.
The other thing that I noticed here, which was uncharacteristic at bare minimum, were the fumbles. One by our guy Anthony Miller and the other one by Quentin Springer here, which obviously we talked about the Cumberbatch touchdown. Certainly, it's just not typical of these 2 guys. Normally, they've got locks on those footballs and they're not leaving them at all. So that I found that certainly out of place here, but once again, wanting to shout out that the great defensive play that was done by both sides of the ball here. We saw some flashes of greatness on the offensive side, certainly Charles Aslan really being the focal point and Nick Orr, but guys like Riley Hildebrand and Eric Cumberbatch and Anas Fad from Ottawa, and then looking over, and we mentioned a few of them, but even Keyshawn Bowen, Arden Martinez, we saw some great work from both of these defenses to really keep the scoring down and to focus on great defensive matchups, really. So I was very happy to see that. Certainly Waterloo, extremely happy to see them get back on track. Obviously, you would have loved to have them come away with the win. I think that offense needs to get going a little bit more, but certainly I don't think that they're anything close to that 71-3 match final that was from Western. I think that they're much better than that, and I think they were on their way to showing that. Ottawa, Well, yes, you can look at this as a great defensive victory and that eventual, keep grinding, King Charles feed him the ball and you're on your way. GG fans, I'm nervous. I'm nervous about this team. I don't we have not seen them really come alive, especially offensively here, and have the proper showcase that I know that we can have. Obviously, you and I are very high on Ben Miracle for what we saw a couple of years ago, and hoping that he can get back to that form in this year. But is losing guys like Gendron really holding them back? We still think the world of Mr. Maxim Alafon. I think that he's one of the best, but it's just not there yet. And we're week 3 of the season. You only have 8 games in the regular season to really get things going, and then it's playoff time. How long is it going to take to really see Ottawa come alive in this offense? And is it going to be too little, too late?
Yeah, totally. And again, I think we highlighted this in tier C, step up, step off when we talked about Ottawa, which and this is I feel like we're kind of repeating ourselves because again, it's such a great competitive OUA this year, and a lot of these teams you can look through the schedule and be like, oh man, that's a tough break for them. But again, just thinking about this Ottawa team where they have to deal with your guy and Foxy Noxy last week in York, right? And Miracle's coming back his first game there. A lot of question marks about York struggles, and that's fair. Now they go in to face K-Mac in Waterloo 3 weeks. On top of all the other time and training camp and everything like that, for him to be able to install and instill his philosophies and his playbook for those guys. And they definitely made him uncomfortable at times, not just with the individual performance, but also as a product of the pressure that they were bringing and causing trouble. And, there was times where, they were getting Aslan in the backfield a few times too. Again, really good performance. I think you hit it on the nose. You think about the weather and all these things. No, it was good defenses. But again, it continues to use this kind of to move forward as we do. They're at home dealing with Ryan Beckmanis for the Queens Golden Gales the following week. To go a step further, they're on the road to deal with Patrick Donovan's Windsor Lancers defense, so on and so forth. Van Workirk on September 28th at Laurier. This is a team where, and I think I mentioned the text that you and I have from mid-June where I called my shot. Larry Kasari was coming back, that he's going to be the MVP, that he's the MVP favorite. This is a team where, if they can keep their head above water throughout the season, and I just don't think they'll have the wins to pull it off, where we expect Ben Miracle to get better, get into that rhythm with the defenses they're going up against. If Charles Asselin can even drop off a little bit, but keep up the production that he's been putting up, I don't think they'll have the wins when it's said and done with this schedule and how good some of these teams are looking. But he's that kind of dark horse MVP with how much they need him right now to play and how badly and how amazingly he's been stepping up. But it starts again coming back home to take on Queens next week. 3:00 game from Gigi's Field for Waterloo. They're getting to rest up before taking on Laurier in the Battle of Waterloo on the 21st. Tom, I jumped ahead a little bit. Any last commentary, or should we move on to our next match?
No, I think everything was said here. Let's move on to the next one.
Brilliant. Well, we go from our 1:00 games in the KW to a 3:00 game kicking off in Kingston from Richardson Stadium. Final score in this game, the Queens Golden Gales 52, the York Lions 19. We obviously mentioned what Ian St. Arnaud was doing in this game. We mentioned Alex Vreekin really stepping up, and we'll get into the details of all that. But the first thing that must be said is, much like in that Waterloo Ottawa game, is if you weren't watching, don't be deceived by the numbers here. And frankly, the thing that might be deceiving for a lot of people is to say, the first comment people might say is the York Lions scored 19 points against the Queens Golden Gales in that defense of Coach Ryan Beckmanis. I was just touting. It was an impressive game by both teams. Queens, as we knew going into it, and as they demonstrated, the better club, resting some guys on that offensive line, really putting the ball in Vreekin's hands. But for a game with that kind of a, not fully crooked, but it's tilted a little bit of a score, it was a fun ball game to watch. York again, just the signs of like, if winning isn't everything. And again, we obviously have a sense of who the opponents are that will be more interested to see, like, oh my gosh, this is the day when you might pick up that first win or that second win and then put the logo back on the helmet, right? But when you watch York play these games now, and this is now the second game we've got to see for them, it's a team that makes sense. You're actually watching a football team, whereas in years past, it sometimes felt like there was just like nothing feasible that could be put together. They're putting together drives. The offense is starting to click, much like we're talking with a lot of these new coordinators. They're doing some things and getting the ball into space, using screen games, getting the ball into their skill guys' hands to make get the ball downfield. Where it's like, yeah, we're watching a football team here. Shout out to York, man. That was, a really impressive loss on the day. Queens, we'll talk about them too. But Tom, getting to see the second iteration or second game of this new iteration of the York Lions, any aspect of it. What did you make them taking their road on the show? Show on the road. Did they take the row on the show too? I don't know how you do that. Tom, go.
Yeah, like you said, once again, we're seeing signs of life here. We're seeing York actually show some promise and getting back to where, not even getting back, getting to where we think that they should go because they haven't been there in a very long time. It's just purely going to take more time. That's it. There's no special recipe here. It's just more time and more experience. There's a few times, certainly in the first half, where they get a too many men in the huddle call, and there's a couple of low snaps, and there's a couple of basic mistakes that are made here because while certainly they got a bunch of new players and they've got a bunch of new coaches and everything else, and they are immediately better on paper than they were last year, this is a brand new team that needs to play together. They need to understand things. Now, obviously, a lot of the mental mistakes you should be able to eliminate in practice, sure, but you're still brand new team, brand new methods, brand new coming together. Previously, like Alex Vreeken has had a few years now to really get used to this offense, to understand his receivers, to understand his O-line and their blocking tendencies, along with all of the other quarterbacks that are in the OUA right now. Whereas Matt Lynn is a transfer in. A lot of the other linemen may be new. There's a bunch of, obviously, those CJFL players that are in here as well. So it's just going to take more time for them to mesh. But then you look over and Matt Lynn, 16 for 34, 271 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And you're going, okay, Alfred Olay,
Yes.
5 catches, 125 yards, and a touchdown. This is the Alfred Olay that we have been waiting for, that we have been expecting. Obviously, he's always showcased himself in the kick return game, but now it's starting to translate to the offense. And now we're starting to see even Avante McCoy, 3 catches for 71 yards. This is what we think these players are able to produce when given the proper opportunities to. So very happy about that. We did see Malchus Alunga also get a little bit going here, 9 attempts for 40 yards. I still think it's difficult because when you get into this, certainly the way that the game started off soon, very soon into like the first quarter, they're already down 21-0. And so when you're in that space, once again, you're okay, we really got to throw if we want to stay into this, and you kind of get away from the run game. But once again, to shout out the defense for York, that first touchdown, 100%, that's Alex Vreeken to Andy Quinn, 13-yard touchdown pass, sure. But the second touchdown is a Silas Hubert fumble recovery for a touchdown. And then the third one is one of Ian St. Arnaud's missed field goal returns. So of the 24 points that are scored in the first half, only 10 can really be attributed to Coach Knox, the mad scientist's defense. So there's signs of life here. Obviously, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a ton of work that needs to go into this team and getting them back to form and getting them to where they need to be. But there's signs of life. It's been a long time since we've been able to say there's signs of life. There's signs of anything with York, and we're seeing it firsthand.
Yeah. And you talk about what Knox's defense was doing, and like if there's one thing that they came in to prove is that they weren't gonna let Kasari go off. And we obviously didn't expect him to go off in this game purely by virtue of the fact that he looks a little banged up against Mac, and you hadn't gotten Vreeken going, and it maybe just made all the sense in the world to say you're playing a lesser opponent. You know what? Kasari still ended up rushing it for only 9 times. He gets a touchdown on the day, but only 24 yards carrying it. You have Jaden Gritzy McDonald as the prime yard getter on the rushing attack with 51 and a touchdown himself. But just the ability to say, because again, offensively, that's certainly still where Queens is at their finest. And should probably note by now, they had 3 backups on their offensive line playing today for Queens, right? And that obviously is going to affect you in every aspect of it. But if you if you have the grace to be able to say that, despite those things, this Queens team has been and still is one of the best rushing attacks in the country. Injuries, backups, yes, I understand. But for Knox to come in and just be able to say, you know what, Nez? And Nez, a guy I played with, and so probably having a little bit of that PTSD and having to prep for a Knox game like we had to do playing your Marauders all those years ago. Tom, you may have this number in front of you and you might know it. And I've maybe giving it away with this preamble. Which of these teams netted more rushing yards?
That would be York.
By a single yard, but I'll take it. 122 yards on the ground for York, 121 for Queens. Not in my wildest dreams with how we've seen these teams playing over recent years would I have thought that Queens could have put up an additional 50 points, additional 52 points through the passing and St. Arnaud getting more of these touchdowns. That fact alone, that's a combination of, as you said, playing from behind somewhat stifles the rushing attack a little bit, but Alunga, Rex Walker still doing some positive things to show that well-roundedness of the offense, and using a lot of double tight sets just to be able to either give Matt Lynn that time to find his Alfred Olays, Avante McCoys, Avery Fords and whatnot, but then also to let these great athletes in Melkus Alunga and Rex Walker be able to find the gap, hit it hard, and get some pay dirt. So again, the way the offense was, despite playing from behind, still keeping that well-rounded mentality, and how your boy Foxy Noxy just came in and said, you know what? We're going to prove it. We're probably not going to win this one, but we're going to come out of here, and I'm certainly going to prove that I can shut down a rushing attack, one of the best rushing attacks in the country. Yes. 3 injuries. Yes, Kasari not getting the carries that we would expect. But of course, on the flip side, that is what set the table for Alex Vreekin to have the day he had. You read the numbers already. I'll read them again. 22 for 29, 302 in the air with 2 touchdowns. And again, we weren't there in Kingston, but by all reports, watching the game from the commentating, weather was all the same that he was dealing with. And it was an excellent performance by him. And I'll end this by just saying, putting himself again in that category where now, as far as top 3 quarterbacks in the league, he is making himself present in that conversation with gusto.
Certainly. And when you look at how things are going here, first off, let me just say, one of the main point, obviously Alex Vreekin had a fantastic day, but to do 22 for 29, 302 yards, 2 touchdowns with 3 backup offensive linemen.
Yes.
Now, remember, folks, typically on a dress roster, with the 55-man dress roster that typically happens, I believe, in the regular season for a lot of things. The way that things shake out, if you are lucky as an offensive line coach, you get 8 guys dressing. Typically, it's 7. I've been in games where it's only been 6 because we've had a lot of injuries in that. So there's a very real possibility that there was a guy starting on this Queens O-line that was not a consistent dresser for them.
That's a great point.
For that person to come in here, and I apologize, I don't know the name of who was injured and who was out, whatever, but for that offensive line to come in and do their thing and to not allow a sack on the day as well, outstanding work, outstanding job by that Queens O-line. We have to shout those guys out because we are former offensive linemen. If we don't do it, nobody else will. So shout out to you, Queens O-line. You did a hell of a job there. But certainly, Coach Knox, that effect that he's got on that defense is now being truly felt. He's really starting to put together a team that, even if people want to say, oh, well, they're still giving up points or they're doing that or this player is not good or whatever the case, the scheme is there. The scheme and how he's drafting things up is certainly there. Those saw blitzes are coming back to haunt people's nightmares for sure are there, but he's also there's a reason why he's called the mad scientist, because the amount of things that he's able to think up of this concept here, I think I can defeat in this way if I play this coverage on this side and this coverage on this side, or if I send this blitz here. He's really outstanding at what he does, and he's only going to get better and better as these York Lions get more and more used to his defense and more used to why he calls the things that he calls, what to look for, and how to really adjust that. Once again, to harken back to the Mac days, there was a lot of times where Mike Daly, star free safety for our Marauders, he had free reign a lot of the times to make certain calls, make certain coverage changes based off of what he saw, because he understood that defense so thoroughly. Now, obviously, he was in that defense for a number of years, and it takes a while to get there, but that's my point. Once you get to that spot with the right players in place, with the right scheme and the right defense, this is going to be something special for sure. It's just going to take time. Now, very quickly, because we've been talking a lot about York, to flip over onto the defensive side of things, there was a very strong possibility that you and I gave out our players of the week to 3 different Golden Gales.
Yeah.
And the guy that I wanted to highlight for sure was the third one that we ultimately ended up giving to one Mr. Eric Cumberbatch, because he also had a phenomenal game. But Silas Hubert, making his presence known. 4.5 total tackles, 3 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. This is Silas coming back to form. This is who we really remember. And there was a bunch of times where he's in that backfield. He's affecting the play in some way, shape, or form. It was in the first quarter, I believe. It was one of those low snaps that Matt Lynn just had to kind of jump on. As he's in the process of jumping on it, Silas Hubert just shows up into the frame. And you're like, Matt Lynn just fell straight down from where he was, and somehow from 3 yards, 4 yards away, you almost beat him there. How is that possible? You had an offensive lineman to get through. He is an outstanding player for this Golden Gale squad, especially on that phenomenal D-line. And I really just wanted to make sure that we shouted this young man out, because my goodness, is he good at football.
St. Hubert is just wrecking game plans. And again, anytime, especially when Queens is running the 30 front, where it's Darian Newell, Silas Hubert, and then Van Wishart, it's just like that's so special. And we were kind of talking about yesterday a little bit when we were at Mac, of like just that kind of gratitude mindset of all things and the opportunities that we've gotten to do. I am grateful I got to watch those 3 with guys like Justin Pace and Melanson, who on that first, the 110-yard return by St. Arnaud, Ashton Miller Melanson was picking up. St. Arnaud looks like he still has the speed to beat these 2 guys, but 2 fours out there, chipping one guy, getting the next guy. Again, the reason that McManus defense is so special, it's kind of, as you're saying, when you have a great person, as you talk about with Knox, calling it up, but then having guys who not only know the system, but are such special talents themselves, is what, and then you add in Vreeken playing like he played today. You add in what we know Kasari can do. The O-line, banged up, but for Jazz Kara, who I'm pretty sure he was one of the 3 that was out. He missed a lot of time last year. Again, I don't think it's being overly disrespectful towards York. I have a hunch they may have just been like, you know what, we're just gonna, keep him in the wings for one more game for this one, because again, the potential this Queens team has, and they know they're hosting a Vanier again, which, no shot at our friends playing football in the maritime provinces out there, but for all these clubs who we feel on their best day can take out anyone in this league, and Queens is certainly one of them. That opportunity for Queens to host, to be in that Vanier, is alive. And I'm sure they're going to dislike me even talking about that, because I feel like in that room, they're like, we don't talk about that stuff. We just don't, right? They kind of went super quiet on their social media and everything like that. But realistically, when you look at the talent, you look at the folks in that room calling up the way their offense, defense, special teams, all these types of things. This is a team that on their best day will take out anyone in this league. And it was a great performance on the day. And for Vreeken, of course, we've talked about these guys for a few years, but it's one Nathan Falcone and Nico Cuomo making hay for him, both with 7 receptions, Falcone with 115 and a touchdown, and then Quamo with 101 yards. Another passing touchdown went to Andy Quinn. But I think I said something to the effect of, the names aren't as sexy as we've come to learn some of the other receivers in the league. These guys have been consistent. And again, on their best days, they are putting up those massive numbers like they did today. So you know what? That passing threat is there. These Queens Golden Gales are for real. And you know what? They take on another great challenge next week when we talk about great defenses and how this passing game is going to fare when they're going a little bit further east to take on the Ottawa GGs with Mr. Eric Cumberbatch and his brother Patrick's defense looking to maybe shut them down a little bit. For the York Lions, they go back home where a rested Windsor team will be coming off the bye to, again, what a defensive matchup we'll see there with Coach Donovan and Coach Knox. Tom, any last commentary from this game in Richmond Stadium?
Super excited for both of these squads, really. I am so happy to see Queens get back to form a little bit, to see that passing game really come into its own. I pray once again to all of the football gods who are out there, Jared Kasari is fully healthy, and they just really wanted to focus on Alex Freakin. Please, that the league is better with him in it. The league is better with Queens really operating at a high level. Please let him be okay, because we want to see him do his thing and be the OUA MVP.
Well, from one team in Queens with a shot at making it to that Vanier to a team in Western being the betting favorite to make it to that Vanier, let's go see what they were doing at home in London, taking on the Carleton Ravens. Final score in this game, Western 52, Carleton 21. Western doing the whiteout. Is a 5 o'clock start, and those jerseys looked good. Those boys looked good in those all whites. And it was also a nice contrast because Carleton, the other side, was going with an all black number. And so it was kind of just like a neat contrast from that standpoint. And Tom, this is a game 52-21. We'll get into all the machinations, everything that happened. A game where we really liked what we were seeing from Elijah Barnes at quarterback for Carleton. But a game that, funny enough, when we previewed it, we're thinking, when I'm asking you, like, what do you need to see from Carleton? What's that X factor that they can do that's not just like saying that, well, anything could happen on any given Sunday or Saturday, what have you, that they could pull off the win? And you highlighted special teams. Tom, how did this game start?
Yeah, just so happened to start off with an opening kick return touchdown by one Roman Campanero for the Western Mustangs. He goes 101 yards and scores for the Western Mustangs. And you go, oh my goodness, wow, what a way to start. And then the very next play, they kick off the ball again, and Carleton fumbles to Western recover. And before the offense has even seen the field, they're already down 14-0. That is a backbreaker in the best of cases, but certainly when you're a team from Ottawa that has traveled all the way to London to play against the defending 3-time Yates Cup champions, and you go down 14-0 before the first minute of the game is done. Oh my God, talk about a backbreaker.
Playing Western metaphorically always feels like you're starting down 14-0 before your offense is playing. When you're actually down 14-0, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But again, I'll start with the Carleton side of things because, the crooked or mildly slanted score at the end of the game, it was a classic example of, where Carleton, despite that start for them, they're showing some good things. They're stopping Western at times, some key moments. Again, that defense is so fast. These guys they have in the secondary and the linebacking core, obviously with Ife Onyeka on the front end, it's a really, really solid defense. But just that situation where then you get into the second half, and eventually it just becomes hard to contain. And our guy Keon Edwards ends up with 3 touchdowns on the day, but just again, to look at what this Carleton team was able to put together, knowing that the first time they were stepping on the field, they were down 2 scores already. Elijah Barnes, 22 for 33 for 275, a touchdown and an interception. And then on the passing end of things, on the receiving end of that, I should say, Tristan Reddy with a huge game, 8 receptions for 121. Kasim Ferdinand, 5 for 89 with perhaps one of the nicest receptions where he gets behind Richard Adu and then does like a diving, twisting catch to then set up a touchdown for them. Ben Huckabee with 4, Derek Yeboah with 4, Tristan Ronaldes with 2 as well. And I want to use that to sort of the final comment I'll just make for this moment right now to then go back to giving this coaching staff the props, to giving, because we talked about how this team made that their name last year on the being on the rise, and even going back the year before that with Coach Grant first coming in with offensively, how effective they pass the ball. And is that because are they not able to run it well and they have to pass? Is passing just the best thing they do, bar none, and they're just leaning into that? And just to, and of course, with Coach Grant, with his history at Mac and how effectively they passed the ball, with his time there and Galley in the mix and Coach P, obviously, and the brain trust there is just outrageous. But to be able to say, okay, Tristan Lefebvre goes down, we have this first-year player and Elijah Barnes step in, and he's talented. I love his reads, the way he's able to make some plays with his feet when he needs to, and the ball he puts is accurate, it's on the money. And so I don't want to take away from him, but I don't know if it's 50-50, whatever the split is, but the fact that they were able to just put another quarterback in the system. And again, I don't want to be treating Elijah Barnes, now that we've seen him in almost 3 games, as just another quarterback. This is a guy that I think, again, can become a dude for sure as he continues to grow with the system. But that system is mighty good.
Listen, we just talked about probably the absolute worst way that you could potentially start a football game, down 14 points within the first minute. And then within 5 minutes of play left in the first half, because I can't do math off the top of my head that fast.
Me neither,
we're
brother.
down 21-0.
Yeah.
But then Carleton comes back and scores 14 unanswered to get back into the game. And I'm watching this happen going like, oh my God, to have the gumption, if you want to say that, to have the confidence to know that you're down 21-0 in London against the 3-time Yates Cup champions, and there's not a single second of doubt, of back down, of anything. These guys just come right back, and they score 2 touchdowns to make it a 21-14 game, and to really try to reestablish themselves was an amazing experience to see. Now, obviously, from there, Western really pulled away, and they didn't score again until the late parts of the fourth quarter, but still, to show that willingness to that, no, we're not going to be intimidated here. We don't care how many championships you've won. You're playing us right now. We're going to give you our best ball. It was really amazing to see. You mentioned it before, but the more and more that you and I are seeing Elijah Barnes, the more and more that I really like this kid. I know, I'll go over the stats again. 22 for 33, 275 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception against a Western defense that is very good. Very freaking good. Not only that, but primarily, or a lot of the time, however you want to word it, they're playing in a 30 front, which is specifically designed to stop the pass. And then on the opposite side, just a quick shout out to Western. They're playing a 30 front, which can be susceptible to the run. Matthew Morin finished his 11 attempts for 44 yards. So did pretty good in the run game as well. Anyways, going back to Carleton. I really like everything that I'm seeing here. We've known that receiving core for Carleton is really great, obviously anchored by Kasim Ferdinand, but as Kasim is getting more and more coverage on him, and certainly I believe, obviously it's a lot more difficult because when you're not live, you have to rely on where the camera is angled, and sometimes they cut out receivers. But I believe for the majority of the game, Richard Adu is on Kasim Ferdinand and manning him up, which is a hell of a task for anybody to go up against. But when you have that focus on Kasim, you need other guys to step up, and that's exactly what Tristan Reddy, Ben Huckabee, and the rest of that receiving core is doing right now. It's so awesome to see that real, if one arm gets taken away, I've got another one right here. And that seems the mentality of this Carleton offense to really get things going here. So I really appreciated all of the effort that I saw, certainly in that first half. But you and I have said it before, one of the big definitions of a championship team is to make those adjustments at halftime in particular. And I would argue that there's no coach better in the OUA than one Coach Gleason, defensive coordinator for those Western Mustangs, in making second half adjustments to come in and shut the door on a very good Carleton offense here. That was outstanding to see Western just shore up and not allow a single other point until late in the fourth quarter. That's a huge shout out to Coach Gleason and that defense.
And sometimes the adjustment for whatever you want to call it is just saying like we're gonna keep with what we're doing, because as you're mentioning, that 30 front leaves you susceptible to the run. And, we talked about with Waterloo being there last week, and they couldn't really get anything mustering on offense, not even that run game that we know works for them and that we saw against Ottawa came back to life. But also just that aspect of that I don't know if it's confidence. I don't know if it's a certain level of humility of saying, all right, if you want to run the ball on our defense, go ahead. That's okay, because I know I have an offense I get to coach alongside with who are going to put up points when they get the ball. So if you want to chew up clock, and I guess I'll shout him out. This is actually in talking with Coach Scotto from Laurier after the game. I don't mean to be stealing this if it's my own point, but it's a brilliant point where he's saying, yeah, they'll let teams, if they want to let you run on them, if not even that Carleton did, not even that Waterloo did. It's like, great, chew up 4 or 5 minutes, get a first down here or there. That's fine. You will run out of time and we'll still be up by 2, 3, 4 scores, whatever it is. And, again, there's the scheme to it, that 3-4 as well, allowing for these guys like McLeod and Buchanan to just like fire like they're getting shot out of a missile. But I think just speaks to, again, what a healthy relationship, no doubt, Coach Gleason and was Gaten Richard, the offensive coordinator, and of course, with Greg Marshall, just all hands on everything there of just that standpoint. I will say, though, because, of course, when we talk about Western, much like with Queens and with Laurier and a little bit with Guelph now, and we'll get to talking about Windsor again next week when they're back in the mix of these teams who Guelph kind of entering the fold with those other big four of teams where, again, looks like the best game could be the best. And so you start to nitpick a little bit. And this isn't a nitpick as much as it is a moment of concern, but still no Kojo Odum in this one. And for him not to be in that game against Waterloo, no shots towards them or what their offense can do by any means, but kind of similar, as we said, with what Queens was doing perhaps against York. Bit of a safer bet to say, you know what? We still know we have some weapons. We can rest one of these guys who's been a little banged up. For a Carleton team to come into your house, and you know what? There's still reason to be able to look at them and say a backup quarterback, a freshman quarterback at that. You know what? Kojo, we'll put a Dubafor on to Ferdinand, and Dubafor is still a CFL caliber cornerback, and we have some other guys, obviously Jackson Finley playing free safety there and just getting his nose into every single ball as it comes out. But slightly more concerning than it is when he misses Waterloo. Obviously, to miss 2 games in a row, missing 2 is more significant than missing the 1, but also just as far as the opponent themselves in terms of the challenge they can bring to the table. Now, of course, this is a Western team that won 2 Yates Cups without Kojo. I'm trying to even remember if he was on the 2021 team or if he may even got hurt in that one. Whatever it is, still knows that he's out of the mix, that they've had immense success with him out of the mix. Again, just something we're still clocking watching this defense and just thinking about a team that, despite winning those 3 Yates Cups in a row, they know that they haven't been satisfied, and they know people have been critical, us to a certain extent, more so with that game against Montreal in the semifinal, with how they've done when they have gotten past the OUA. Kojo, I think, unlocks their ability to get back to that Vanier and really make some hay in that game. I don't know if you made too much of that, if you heard anything about Kojo in terms of his status or just anything, but as far as that defensive standpoint, it's still obviously worth noting.
Most definitely. And I think when you look at some of the production that Kojo Odum has had when he has been playing, he's certainly somebody that could take this defense to another level, or at least help it get into that way. But the guys who play in that defense right now are no slouches either. I mean, you look at Jackson Finley, our guy, 5.5 total tackles, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Riley McLeod with 4.5. Xavier Allen with 4 tackles, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery himself. There was a ton of really great work on this defense for Western fans to be very excited about. Um, I'm really interested to see how Western comes out against Laurier because I think we could be seeing a trend here. And I don't want to get too far into it because it's the review, not the preview. But I wouldn't be surprised if a Kojo Odum is, like you said, a safe bet. Make
Mm.
sure that he's healthy because we got another big one coming. And so, how much that comes into play, obviously, we'll find out next week. But sticking with this, Western is really showcasing what they're able to do very early on, as they always do, certainly here. But with the addition of one Roman Campanero, who has that touchdown to start off with, obviously, but is obviously somebody that you can say is a real threat in the return game. And then to look at obviously the offense, which is humming just along. Evan Hillock, 16 for 23, 241 yards, 2 touchdowns, and one very uncharacteristic interception in the regular season, which really does not happen very often. You've got Keon Edwards and Keanu Yazbek who are doing their thing. Seth Robertson, 4 catches, 119 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Have yourself a day, young man.
And where was the long from?
At the 55.
Oh my goodness. It just keeps giving back to us. My apologies, Tom. Keep on going.
Oh, it's outstanding. I really, really like how this Western team is looking here. I think that last year we were looking at this 23 Western team and comparing them to the 22 team and saying, oh, I think there's something wrong here. I think there's some cracks in the armor and all this stuff. And that was obviously very surely corrected after we saw how well they played and they won the Yates Cup. But once again, playoffs is one thing. But anyways, coming into this year, seeing how they're playing once again, and they look like they're even better than they were last year. They're continuing on that path. The defense looks pretty solid. This offense is coming along, and if special teams can continue to be a factor here, not even necessarily getting them a touchdown per game, but if you have to account for Roman Campanero and suddenly now you're flipping the field with some of your returns, ooh, a Western offense with a short field to work with, that's scary.
And that's a return team that on most days also has Daniel Kabongo out there as well. Didn't play in this one. And as well on that defensive side, didn't even note that there was no Max Nixon in the mix either. No Craig Coleman on the offensive side, that H-back position that's so key. So again, yeah, Western's looking really good. And again, I know that sounds so silly to say, but yeah, if you go back to last year, it just felt like there was times where it just things weren't just as sharp. Last thing, just sticking with who's where is that quickly came to our attention that Keegan O'Neill was on the sideline in street clothes. Now, obviously, Western has such a plethora of offensive linemen, from the dressers who don't start to some non-dressers, scout team guys they could probably bring up who would still fill that gap effectively. But that's no UA All-Star, so that matters for sure. On the other hand, and I don't know his status, right? Don't know what's going on there. Seemed like he was just in his street clothes. He wasn't like favoring like one thing or the other, no cast or no whatever like that, right? On the other hand, though, his name doesn't appear on the stat sheet anywhere. His name's in the participation list, and I believe the first game we've seen from one Malcolm Frazier, sophomore defensive lineman, who I believe, if memory serves, was Western's all OUA rookie team participant from last year. Whether or not that's factored into them playing the 30 front, knowing that he's not there. And so, you know what? Let's stick with our guy Von Muhldorfer in the middle with, Soren Hallschmidt and some of these other cats and everything like that. But now if he's getting back in the mix, and again, shows him on that participation, I didn't necessarily clock him during the game watching. And again, I'm scouring through it. I don't see him with a stat listed here as Tom shakes his head in agreement with that. But again, just a huge piece back into the mix for this team, especially on that defensive line where, again, when you are the Western Mustangs, folks like us are allowed to say, yeah, clearly you've had a really good D line, a D line that probably other teams would love to have. And yeah, when it was winning time, when the chips were on the table, and you're facing Laurier in these high leverage games, they were getting after the quarterback like they were the best pass rushing team all year long, which all year long they hadn't been. Nonetheless, if Frazier's back in the mix there, right? Nixon's coming back, and if Coda's back, like again, this is a defense. We saw how effective the special teams was. You talk about Campanaro, but as well with the punt blocks that they got in the first two teams. Like this is a very scary Western team. And though we won't be watching it live, cannot wait to see what happens in that game next week when they hit the road to take on the Laurier Golden Hawks at 1 o'clock for Carleton. Tough one because they got to go all the way back home and then come back to Toronto to take on the UofT Blues, a team in UofT that for those folks who remember, they're always playing on defense now. The big Kinsell Phillip moment 2 years ago, I believe it was a home game for UofT hosting Carleton. So very excited to see what these two clubs are doing come week 4. Tom, any last commentary from this game here?
It's crazy to look and to see a Carleton team that we know has a ton of potential and has the opportunities to do some great things, and you're 0-3. Now, obviously, you have to look at the quality of the teams that you're playing against.
Totally.
You opened up against a very good Guelph team that we know now is very good. You then hosted the Windsor Lancers and lost but on a last-second field goal, which is obviously a heartbreaker there. But you were in that game all the way up to the end. And then you play against the 3-time defending champs in the Western Mustangs. So certainly that is a massive factor into this. But still, a very surprising 0-3 start for these Carleton Ravens.
And again, as we've talked about specifically with them as our case study, that progress isn't always linear. And from what we've seen with Elijah Barnes, obviously guys are going to come and go during his tenure there. But if he is the future of this team, and I don't know Tristan Lefebvre's status, nor his, off the top of my head, his years of eligibility, so on and so forth, it makes sense knowing that obviously since Tristan's been there for a few years and Elijah's in his first year, there will certainly be a time where even if it comes back, whether later this year or next year, and there's a QB controversy you have to work out, if Elijah keeps on this progress and no one else swoops in to then compete with him, really excited to see what this Carleton team with Coach Grant and how he just can find gaps in the best of defenses, passing defenses, and get this kid going. Let's go to our final game, though, Tom. The second game that you and I were live and direct from in Hamilton, Ron Joyce Stadium. Final score in this game, the McMaster Marauders 32, the UofT Blues 3. Where do we want to go with this, Tom? I'll start with a comment from, hey, shout out to you, Jeff Cooling, because he asked me after the game, he was like, hey, how many points did UofT score in the Guelph game? And I think he was genuinely curious, but I'm like, are you trying to do this whole thing where, UofT only scores 3 against your Marauders and they put up 14 against my Griffins, and now you're trying to do some kind of setup for the following week, the At the 55 Bowl, to get me scared? Well, though Mr. Cooling's words didn't scare me, man, oh man, from the things we're seeing from this MAC team, them starting to come together. That competitive game against Laurier, the near comeback against Mac, and taking care of business against a team that's really given you the business over the last couple of years, knocking out of the playoffs twice, once on your own home field, that defense being as good as it is, as good as it's ever been. Okay, Mac. I see you, Mac. I see you. And that's not just because we're planning some stuff with props, even the McMaster Marauders. Shh, keep that on the down low. We'll see. Maybe I'll have to cut that out. We'll find out. Tom will tell me later. But again, because when you actually look at what they're doing on the field, yeah, it's looking like this is a team that's finally shaken off whatever it was they were dealing with when you look at the talent on the roster, you look at some of these other pieces around the team, you look at the fact that they're the McMaster Marauders, Ron Joyce Stadium, everything about that, and just being like, yet why are they not winning games? They seem to have moved past that. And arguably, you could maybe say the same thing about Guelph over the last couple of years. Tom, we were there on the sideline drinking this one in, me trying to stave off hypothermia. What were your takes as the Marauder alumni in the house?
Oh, it was so nice to see the boys take care of business, especially against a team that has had their goose cooked since the start of this new decade here. They had not beaten the U of T Blues until this past Saturday. So I was very happy to see them take care of business, and certainly the way that they did. I would have liked that offense to have gotten going a little bit faster. They had a couple of quick 2-and-outs to start the game. But our guy, Drake Bodie, flexing his muscles and says, "Hey, offense, you need a boost? No problem. I got you." Interception return gets him down into the red zone, and Keegan Hall takes care of business. They get in. They get on the board at the bare minimum. And then to see a corner route caught by Jackson Taylor, one of the Jackson 2, directly in front of us. And I may or may not have lost my cool in celebrating with the young man, or at least yelling at him, being all fired up. But that was an awesome moment to see and an awesome thing to be a part of. I was very, very happy to see them take care of business. And plus, getting a chance to be in the VIP space and on the field watching the game, that just brought another big smile to my face. It was an awesome atmosphere, and I was a little concerned with how many people were there, certainly at the start of the game, but it did end up filling up. It's not a full packed house like I was hoping for, but still, it looked like if the stadium holds 5 or 6 thousand, it looked like there was 3 or 4 in there. So I was happy with that as well. It was an overall great day.
And again, it was bloody cold there as well.
Oh yeah.
I almost wanted to get out of there at halftime. And you mentioned those big scores for them. You mentioned, yeah, the Jackson Taylor with that touchdown, and going into that Queens game. And obviously it took to the second half for them to get going. But the thing we noticed early in the game that had me thinking, oh my gosh, could this be the upset that you were calling it to be? And I don't think I gave you your flowers on that, right? You trusted your McMaster Marauders with your guy Keegan Hall, with how good that defense is, to then get their stuff going. And obviously early in that Queens game, it looked like, they're in two different leagues. That was a must watch. And again, shout out to our friends with the McMaster Marauders social media crew over there. But the big thing was, of course, seeing 89 on the field back for McMaster and James Priestner. And what a cool moment it was seeing his first touchdown. And simultaneously how weird that feels to say that, because being like, he's what, in his third year, like he missed pretty much all last year, and so that adds in as well. But I didn't pull that number up. I just heard a few people speaking on that after the game as we're kind of schmoozing with the folks there. Again, and we don't have the stats here. They don't seem to have been updated from being there. It seemed like there was a bit of issue with the stats keeping, a couple students who may have called in sick or what have you. I'm sure it'll get added eventually. So I don't have the final rushing numbers for Braden Kelly on the ground. But again, this is a MAC team that won a Yates Cup 5 years ago, being like, we passed the ball, extremely effective, and spread it out in doing that. So you can't necessarily game plan. So what we were talking about after the Laurier game. Cool. You know that Jackson Cooling is going to be the guy we want to target. Let's introduce you to this new Jackson, right? And now that Priestner's in the mix, and Everett Reed, and Nicholas Adair, and getting my guy, and now officially your guy too, since he plays at your school and you got to meet him and know the lovely, amazing young man he is, in my guy, my guy, Noah Amaral. Oh my God. My heart literally stopped beating when I saw him go down for a second after his amazing carry rush and then a pass reception he got, but he seemed all good after the game. So many weapons there. You highlighted again with Drake Bodie, Carter Blatt, our dude, Josh Cumber, Shimbalanga there, Matsukas, and the guys on the front end. This is a MAC team right now. And again, as we highlighted, Everett Reed, as we saw him do last year a little bit, took a punt to the crib, though it was called back. He's finding their rhythm. And again, much like how the question you posed about whether Guelph Laurier is the biggest rivalry, I'm asking to wait for another week on that. As far as just whether MAC is fully back, and they don't need to beat Guelph necessarily, but that's the game I'm still going to wait for to be able to fully say, like, oh, okay, like, are they doing the Jekyll and Hyde thing again? Or are they just like, no, hi, remember us? We're one of the historic teams of the OUA. Thanks. Tom, anything on that? Or, of course, another team was playing in here in the UofT Blues, a young club who, again, we saw good things from, right? The score was a tough one, but we saw good things that we'll certainly talk about. Where are you at now with this game?
Well, first off, I really wanted to say that never in a million years did I think I would see you cheering so aggressively for those Marauders. I know it was just because of your guy Noah. I know, but it was still to see you cheering for a team in maroon that made me smile from ear to ear. Even though earlier that day you were like, "I will freeze to death before I buy a McMaster sweater." So it was an awesome day, an awesome moment. But I do want to give some shout outs to some of the folks on the UofT side of
Yeah.
things as well here. Obviously, we don't have the stats in front of us, which is a bit unfortunate. And while being on the sideline was awesome, an awesome moment, and something that I probably had to stay there for a little too long because I was so excited about this. I didn't get a chance to see all of the defensive guys that were really making a hit, or at least see their numbers on the field. But I did want to shout out one defensive end, number 90, Tucker Burke, who I knew from the UofT side was really disrupting things for that offense. There was a bunch of pressure coming from the outside, certainly during this game. But one play in particular, there was supposed to be a rollout pass for Keegan. And for those of you who don't know, who some of our listeners, typically you have two additional blockers go to the front side. So if Keegan's rolling out to the left, you have two guys coming to that front side to really seal that edge so that he's able to get out and around. Tucker Burke splits the double team, goes right through and tackles Keegan for a massive loss and setting them back for a 2nd and 17 or something along those lines. So he really played fantastic in this one. I was really happy to see some of the improvements that we're continuing to see with this UofT varsity blue squad. Obviously, there's still a lot of things to be worked on. There's still a lot of areas to really focus on here, but you've got the pieces in place, and there's flashes of that brilliance. When you see Caleb O'Donoghue on the run, finding his guys down the field and putting together something of a march, you and I are looking at each other like, damn, when these guys are on, they look really good. And once again, this is a MAC defense that we know is very good. So to move the ball on them was really fantastic. Obviously, they only ended up with 3 points on the day. So lots and lots of work to be done there, certainly. But once again, they have the right people in place. I believe in Coach DA. I think he's got a fantastic staff, including our guy, Tommy Kanichis. Shout out to you. Shout out to Coach Carly Manners. It was an awesome moment getting a chance to speak to the both of them afterwards as well. But there's a lot of things that I really like about this UofT team. There's a couple of moments here where if you just get this play here, if you just get this here, or maybe with a little bit more experience in tough games, you have that capability and that confidence to know that you can get back into this, whatever that looks like. I like this UofT squad. I think that the future for them is very bright. And I just wanted to make sure that I shouted them out. And I apologize. We don't have the stats to properly dive into that and to properly showcase everybody. But still, really loved everything that we saw. Jake Oseen obviously doing his thing once again as well. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a shout out as well to my guy, Coach Ross Asaro, who
Yeah.
was my O-line coach from like 15 years ago. It was so great seeing him. You mentioned Jake Oseen having a good game, though without the numbers, but we saw him go down at one point, but he seemed to bounce back up, get back in the game. A thing that I really liked UofT get back to a little bit more, that again, I don't have the numbers to validate, that seemed like happened more so in Waterloo, less so against Toronto, pardon me, against Guelph, where we saw them use a lot of those receiver screens to try and make things happen offensively, was getting Chris Joseph the ball in space, whether it
Mhm.
was on crossing routes, slant routes, whatever it was, because this kid with the ball in his hands is so dynamic. Like his top speed, if his talent in other areas is one that's going to get him into an East-West Bowl, we're going to actually get to see him with laser time, and maybe we can just reach out to the folks that we know at UofT if they're doing those timing things themselves, because I'm so curious how fast he is. And
Mhm.
it seemed like defensively, schematically, the way that Mac played compared to the way that Waterloo played allowed to stifle some of those would-be even bigger runs that he was able to net against Waterloo, perhaps a little more zone turned some possible, again, big breakers into opportunities to shut it down a little bit. But again, seeing him get into the mix with Oseen, we saw it seemed like in the run game, from the run game standpoint, Lucas Stoikos, it seemed like he got the start there. Again, without the numbers, it's hard to verify. It felt like they had a tough time getting the run game going. We saw still a good mix, though, of Jack Nyros and Garrett Ellis. So, again, the talent's there. We love the guy calling it up, not just because he's a super awesome dude, he's a great coach, but again, you can start to see like it's so cool when you can kind of see the thinking in action of like, oh, right, that's what he's trying to do here, getting this guy into space or work these types of whatever it might be, right? So again, the pieces are there. I trust in the infrastructure there. With Coach Da as at the top of that list in terms of just setting the culture and setting the standard, this team's going to get there. Tom, did you make anything of the fact that I don't remember how at what point it was in the game? We did see U of T give Scott Barnett some run.
Mhm.
Could have just been a product of, you know what? The guy fought against Kinsale Phillip to win that position last year. O'Donohue seems to win it at the start of this year, and we give him the look for the first couple of games, the first 3 games. Even if O'Donohue's still our guy, let's get Barnett in there a little bit. Or was it, you know what? Caleb's just not giving us what we need right now. Let's go to Barnett. And you know what? If we see the things we need to see, then when we come out next week against Carleton, it might be 17 out there instead of 16 for the start of the game. What did you make of that standpoint? Or was it just a function of garbage time late in the game?
I suspect it's more so garbage time rather than maybe there's a quarterback controversy per se. I think that Caleb O'Donohue, while still only having the 1 win and finishing right now as of week 3, 1-2 for this varsity blue squad, still brings a lot of dynamic play to this offense in particular. So I still really believe in Caleb O'Donohue here. I think he's the guy going forward. Jack Nyros was really impressed me because you and I were talking about, hey, Lucas Stoikos, obviously we haven't really seen him as much. He's due for something. And Garrett Ellis has really been doing their thing at the running back spot. And then Jack Nyros comes in and he starts laying the boom on some of these Marauders. And it takes a couple of guys to get him down at certain points. And I'm looking around like, holy crap, they've got some ballers here. They got some dudes on that side of the ball in those Blues. So really like to see that. Would love to see that running game really get going here as well. And I have to, if we're going to talk about the UofT offense on the other side of things for that defense, we already talked about Mac a little bit, but our guy in Wes McLennan,
Yes.
he comes in on a linebacker blitz and blows up the running back that's trying to block him. He should have come away with the sack. I can't remember. I think it was Scott Barnett. He takes off and still is able to run down the field. But my goodness, this young man is only in his 2nd year, is already being a very prominent member of that Marauder defense, starting for them as well at that middle linebacker spot, or at least the will, and then transition into that middle linebacker spot. I am very, very excited about the potential that this young man has. I hope nothing but the best for him. And that was an awesome moment to be able to see, certainly with a great view of it.
There was a audible just like ooh throughout the whole stadium on that one. And again, just another dude where we're going to shout out the St. Thomas area and the London region sort of writ large, producing the likes of Wes McLennan. If I remember correctly, we got to see his pops Shane there as well. And obviously, like, it gives me chills just like thinking about how proud you could just visibly see in him. And yeah, with that and he matches the mentality of that defense, hard hitting, athletic guy, right? They don't have those linebackers really like with their linebackers and DBs with so many of them, with the exception of a few who are like perhaps like slightly more just like twitchy. It's almost like they're all the same kind of build. It's like they could all just rotate in, which is kind of again kind of like that offense in the skill realm where it's like it's just that we can get it into your hands. You could be the guy today, but maybe it's going to be you. Maybe you're going to lay the big hit to set, kind of get the mojo going and all those things. Meanwhile, number 13, Josh Cumber, just out there on the field side, just holding it down as always. No, again, we'll have a lot of fun with our preview pod for week 4. And of course, with the At the 55 Bowl and our OUA Game Day Live setup we're going to be going through. And obviously, it's meaningful because of our connection to these teams from a purely, and you made your very funny joke about what I said about not buying Mac gear, but from a purely X's and O standpoint, football standpoint, and just with my love of OUA football, Canadian football, and everything like that, I'm very, pleased to see what Mac did last night against a solid, though young and developing team in UofT. But again, we'll see how that looks on the road against Guelph. And as they continue through the season, but yeah, again, like them being good is good for everyone, right? It's the truth of the matter. Tom, a funny thing happened at the end of the first half. Do you want to make some mention of that before putting a bow on it? Because it certainly was something I don't think I'd ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah, we it's the first time that I've ever seen a controversy in when the game was supposed to end. We didn't you and I were standing on the sidelines. We were speaking to a few of the folks at the McMaster hierarchy, including the athletic director. And see the MAC team come off because the final whistle has blown, and we're just kind of assuming that everything is all good. And then we see a few of the guys start to come back. We look out onto the field, and the U of T team has not left for halftime, despite the scoreboard saying 0-0. And Coach DA is out there talking to some of the referees and saying, "Hey, what the heck is going on here?" And so some of the MAC guys come back out, and then they're told to go back in, and then there's a lot of back and forth. Ultimately, it seems like there was supposed to be some more time on the clock, and that clock ran out, and it was a whole mess of issues that probably, to be honest, probably cost U of T some points. Um, which, like I said, had never seen before. I don't want to blame anybody because there's still a lot of things up in the air, but it was just a very bizarre area.
Yeah, it was definitely weird seeing the Mac team run all back out and saying some words that I won't say right now. And kind of just going through the revolving door and just heading right back into the locker room. No, I don't want to make anything of it. You're right. Like if it were the case, as it possibly was, that they should have had the chance to at least kick a field goal there, it may have cost some points in the grand scheme of things in this game. You can walk away from that one. It's obviously frustrating and to be on the U of T side of that and interpreting it. But again, not knowing the full details of it, I don't want to cast aspersions in terms of anyone screwing up. And you know what? Made a lot of comments coming off that U of T Guelph game last week with all the penalties. We were live for 2 games, caught the other 3 this morning, just trying to catch up and make my notes. Hey, Stripes, that's a 2 thumbs up from me for this week. That was an outstanding job. And of course, you always have the love and respect for me for having the hardest job in the industry. And just without you, there is no football. Tom, anything left on this one for us?
Hell yeah. I love that you brought that up. The last thing that I wanted to bring up here, we've talked about a bunch of other people. And once again, we haven't really been able to give the flowers to both of these teams without properly knowing the stats. And I apologize for that. Keegan Hall is a
Egan
damn
Hall.
good quarterback. Call me a homer, call me everything else. I think it's Taylor Elgersma and Evan Hillock in the 1 and 2 spot. Debate who you think is in that 1 and 2, and Keegan Hall is in that 3 spot. I think he's finally starting to come into his own. He's got some solid blocking from that offensive line, which we have been hoping for the past couple of years now, and he's finally starting to come into his own here. He's making good quality throws. Both of those balls, one to Jackson Taylor and one to James Priestner, happened in the end zone that we happened to be in, and they were on the money, perfect balls, perfect spots where only his guys could get them. He's constantly shown he is an elite quarterback in every sense of the word, and I'm putting my own stamp on it. He is in the top 3 of best quarterbacks in the OUA, and that this league has a lot of really good ones. But I'm putting my stamp on it. Keegan Hall is damn good at football.
No, and you know what? I love that for you. And it's like he's made in a lab of like, you know what, a little sugar, spice, and everything nice, and then that chemical X, whatever. But like, because getting to talk to him, see him engage with folks in the community after the game, like again, it's just like it's literally like he's made in a lab. And I'm not saying that it's anything but genuine how he engages with folks, but it's just so picturesque of just like if you did like a character sketch of like what does a quarterback look like. Well, he's gonna be like 6'5". He's gonna be built, have a big arm. He's gonna be fast enough to be able to do all these things, read defenses as well. And then when he comes off the field, when it's all said and done, extraordinarily polite, extraordinarily cordial to everyone he meets. And just, yeah, shout out to you, young man. And you know what? I'm going to still wait till I'm, signed, sealed, delivered, putting him in that big 3, but he's certainly a name along with the likes of Alex Vreeken, who we talked about, and some other incredible quarterbacks in this league who make just watching and covering this game so fantastic. We've said it before. UofT's returning home to take on Carleton, and Max hitting the road for the At the 55 Bowl. Tom, before we wrap up this whole thing, do you want to just say a few more words about that? We'll certainly be posting some information to keep people abreast to kind of what you need to be keeping your eyes and ears open for, where to be, all these types of things. But before we close up on the week 3 review, what else do we want to say? Because it's here, man. It's those thoughts, ideas, words are now becoming actions, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And however it goes, it'll be a great thing for us. What more do people need to know right here, right now?
Something to be said about speaking words into existence and having the universe manifest it. And in this case, the universe goes by the name of Billy Brown with the Griffin football squad, but still it's been manifested. So shout out to you, Billy Brown. Really can't appreciate everything that you do, not only for Guelph, but for the game itself. Outstanding work. You and Coach Stu Lang and everybody part of the amazing advancement team with the Griffin football. Shout out to you guys. Going back to that, at the 55 Bowl, we will be live and direct at the Royal City. The game plan right now is to start at 11 a.m., go for an hour and a half, really dive in and to do something of a preview pod. The caveat here is that while there will be some overlap from the preview pod that we will release like we normally do, we are saving our picks for the live day on that Saturday. So if you want to find out who we're really picking and who we're going with, you have to tune in there to see that for yourselves. We will be going right up until about 12:30. We will then shout it out over to the OUA TV and the Griffin football preview team that kicks off the game from there. But we will be breaking down every single OUA squad with a little bit of extra oomph in there and potentially some special guests from the Guelph Griffin Hall of Fames that are there. So that lots of exciting things happening very, very soon. And I'm just so excited to be getting to do this with you, my friend.
Tom, you say they're going to have to tune in for this to get our picks as if they don't know who we're going to pick for Mac versus Guelph. Are you crazy? No, it's going to be a lot of fun. And again, it's a step that we've been wanting to take for a while. And with the help of the Lang Innovation team and with our conversations with Bill Brown, as you mentioned, giving us this opportunity and knowing that, again, no matter what comes of it, it'll be great because whatever happens, we know we can get better for future opportunities. And I can't wait to be there with you. And if anyone heard that hour 30 live comment that Tom made and say, fellas, I don't know how you're going to do that. Well, as I'm checking the clock right now, we're almost hitting the 2-hour mark on this review podcast. So I think that's as good a moment as any to put a bow on this one. Tom, what a joy it was being with you for those 2 games yesterday. Getting to do this, as always, talking shop. We'll do our preview pod for week 4 that, as you mentioned, we'll save a little bit for the At the 55 Bowl next Saturday. So you'll hear us talk about all those games coming up in week 4 later on this week, right here at the 55.